Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Let's try that again. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's so encouraging to have energy coming back now and then, you see. Well, I'm delighted to be here with you and to really look at kind of what happens next. Here we are at a very interesting time on the planet. We're moving, as you know, from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. And at this time, we're sort of in a bardo, that in-between space of two ages. And this is the time when humanity will anchor the teachings that go forward into the new age. In other words, when we transit from one astrological age to another, there could be such a thing as just wiping out everything that's been. Yet, at this particular time, because there is so much information available, and much of it has come through the resource work of the great Theosophists, and while I was involved with it initially, not as much as Moya or Katumi, still, it was kind of a divine plan for an age, the Piscean age. This set the field, you might say, for what is now coming about, entrance into the Aquarian age. And so what we have to do at every level, and certainly I've been doing it with a number of Buddhist teachings, because there are certain things from the Buddhist tradition that need to be available and anchored well into the collective consciousness as we enter a new age. And so at this time, all of you might want to be thinking about how will we take the bulk of these teachings and make them available in a different time. Clearly, many people have trouble with the language because it was written in a time when people spoke and wrote differently. But it doesn't mean we want to get rid of the information, does it? In fact, it's very important that we not get rid of the information. It's very important that these principles and concepts and great understandings be carried forward. And so, I work through a nonprofit organization in the U.S. called the Dwjhal Khul Foundation. And in that we have a school. It's called the Rocky Mountain Esoteric School. And I predicted through Alice Bailey, but she thought it would be closer to 1975 when I set up a school in North America in the mountains. And we've finally done that. But we will be creating an online class beginning in October on the 7 rays. How do we take those into a new age and make them palatable for more people to, again, approach and master? So I think we have our work cut out for us. And as we look at the Theosophical Society, there's been, of late, in many places are closing their doors, aren't they? There's been kind of a falling off of membership. Not because there's anything wrong with the information. It's good, solid, esoteric information. And yet, as we go to a new time, we must think about how to carry this forward and how to make it, I guess we'll say, modern, in a way that many people can actualize. And so, what I want to, I guess, call you to think about today is how we will do this. Now, granted, you will have help from the spiritual plane. But you are, as human beings, the arms and legs, the hands and feet, really, of those of us on this other plane. We have a partnership. And just as we need you, you need us. It's a reciprocal arrangement. And this is how we carry things forward from our perspective. We don't have bodies. Well, once in a while, some of us do manifest them, but it's not really the practice right now. Because the idea now is to raise humanity's understanding of who they are and to make, let's say, more available a different sense of the spiritual plane's relationship to the physical plane. Now, it's not all set up. You know, I can't tell you how you will realize that, but you will. You may not do it tomorrow, but it will be realized. And it will come from people such as yourselves who have been open and yearning for truth and understanding what this cosmos is all about, you see. It's all aware. You know, we could say that at the time of what has been termed the Big Bang, consciousness was there, observing. And all of you were there, but not as individuals. A different form of consciousness. There was a great awareness, observing, witnessing, if you will, the coming forth of not only, well, first of all, the universe, and then within it, this little planet called Earth. Many others as well. But there is a part of you that has never been born and will never die. There is a part of you, in truth it is your essence, that has always been here, watching the universe, as it evolves. It has changed. In fact, it's changing all the time, isn't it? One star system eats another star system, or one begins to go out. Its mission is accomplished. And there are many ways that we could say the human journey is built upon or reflective of the cosmic journey. It's a very big picture. Now, right now on this planet, it's very interesting because, you know, the human view has in some ways gotten smaller or narrower. So many people are interested only in their little life. And you know, one lifetime is a very short span, really. You know, you stand on the precipice of some great canyon that's been there 300,000 years or more, and it's still developing. And we compare that to a human life, and the human life is very short. Why? Well, part of it has to do with your makeup. You're not made of rock. You're not made of granite or sandstone or anything like that. You have bodies that can move, that can explore space in and of itself. And it's made of a very soft material. And over time, soft material tends to wear out, unlike rocks that have a much longer lifespan. But what we're trying to see now is how all of this is moving to a new definition. Of course, it's planet Earth that is moving out of the influence of the constellation of Pisces and moving under the influence of the constellation of Aquarius, yes, but you know, as above, so below. Indeed, change, when it happens anywhere, is initiated everywhere. Now, this is an interesting time because the frontier going into the age of Aquarius is totally going to be the consciousness. And of course, consciousness is who you are. You have put on a body to do a life, to understand how things work at a physical level, but it's not who you are, is it? You are much older. In fact, you are all eternal. You have, I sometimes tell my students, life is kind of like a costume party. Everybody puts on a disguise and they go and try to find their friends, and then when it's all over they hang those disguises up and do another one. And it's more to it, of course, than that. But this idea that you are separate or that you don't know one another has become quite fashionable here recently. And so out of that will come, I believe, a new understanding of what this level of consciousness really is that is eternal. Humans, by and large, don't have a sense of their own eternality. As a concept, it's understood, of course, but as an experience, you know, life is experienced in one body form and then another body form. And that sense of eternality flowing through individual consciousnesses is not the way most people experience it. So ultimately, we have a lot of work to do. we have to really enter a new paradigm. And you know, people like Dr. Jean Houston has referred to it as a whole system transition. And if you look at the planet right now, you can really see signs of that going on. What you see is the breakdown of many structures that have been around for a long time. And you see the breakdown certainly in the political arena. In some cases you see breakdown at the governmental levels. Of course, they're tied to the political levels. But in many places you can see breakdowns at the educational level. Even the medical systems are in some places really breaking down because they won't meet the needs of where you are going. Now, of course, we want to move to the place where everyone learns how to heal himself or herself. And I have done some teachings on immortality. You know, it's something that humans have always sought, isn't it? And partly, people say, well, it's just because humans are afraid to die. That's part of it. That's not all of it. Having a sense or a reality on immortality is really much truer to who and what you really are. You see, you are eternal beings. I know you know the concept. I'm probably going to say that a lot today because I really want to drive it home. You are in the bardo, between ages. We have not yet completely left the Piscean age, nor have we completely taken up residence in the Aquarian age. But we are in this interesting space where the potentialities that you will draw forth for your new reality are just buzzing with electric energy, waiting to be pulled into manifestation. And then there is this process of consciousness. What is it doing? How is it experiencing itself and the cosmos? We must look at this again. And we must see, you know, as much as you know about the world, there are still some mysteries that haven't been solved, you know. It's very interesting because on the one hand, you think you know, and perhaps some do, that the Earth turns or rotates on an axis. Indeed, according to your scientific calculations, it's moving about 1,041 miles per hour. And because of that, you experience the electromagnetic field. You have this outer crust spinning around a core of iron and nickel, and you get a magnetic field. And so that would seem to prove it. You experience day and night as a result. That seems to prove it. And yet, if the Earth is turning from west to east at over 1,000 miles per hour, you have to ask yourself, why is it that a flight from London to New York takes the same time as a flight from New York to London? I mean, after all, a plane, normal commercial plane, flies at about half the speed of the way that the Earth is turning. So if you're flying from west to east, you should never get there. If you're flying from east to the west, it should cut it half the time, but it isn't. You check the time. So is the Earth really spinning at that speed? There are some who do not believe it does. Now they say, well, you see, if that's happening, if I believe the Earth is spinning, then I have to also believe that the atmosphere around the Earth is fixed, moving with it. And yet when you really look out there, what is fixed? I think in the New Age you will have a new look at astrology, because astrologers have always looked at the sky as if the constellations are fixed. And if everything else is moving, how can they be fixed? Astrologers today still use the same charts that were used some 2,000 years ago, as they were originally built, without really checking out to make sure, with careful calculations, that everything has truly remained fixed. But has it? You see, so much depends on the consciousness that you open to explore these things. So, as you can see, there is so much to explore. What is the basic nature of your universe? Should we say it's a first-rate universe? a second ray. We say that the solar system for this planetary configuration is a second ray solar system. But what about the universe? Well, we'll be safe and say it's a 7-ray universe. And indeed, it is. But how can we use that to learn something about what it is to be this vaster consciousness? You must begin contemplating your original state, when as one vast consciousness you collectively watched as creation happened. Now that is really the big picture. And from that, distill something to help you understand who you are as a local self in the small picture. It's a very intriguing journey, and what I can tell you is probably everyone will see it a little bit differently. Why is that? Well, one of the things it demonstrates is the vastness of your source. When you stop and think about how many different expressions and experiences are possible on just this one little planet. You know, as planets go, it's not even very big. As solar systems go, it's not that big. Indeed, even as galaxies go, the Milky Way is not that big. And if you think of perhaps 10 billion stars in this galaxy, you begin to have, well, it's very hard to think in those terms, isn't it? You know, 1,000 is pretty hard to think. Kathlyn used to say, well, I'd say, well, think in terms of this. And she'd say, how high would that stack in $1 bills? I have a sense of how much is there, or how high would that stack in matches or something. And because these big numbers are not really approachable, even though today everyone's throwing them around. You know, just look at the national debts of countries and all them into the trillions of dollars. No one can even imagine what that means. So it's kind of an interesting time to be evolving. When the field is set and the activity is staged or cloaked in reality so big you can't understand them. But you see, that does tell us what's in store for consciousness. It has to stretch. Now, in my work through, certainly, I conferred with Blavatsky, and I certainly, of course, worked with Alice Bailey. That work was really to stretch the collective mental body. And it has. I mean, anyone who's encountered the work and really sat with it and studied it and pondered it and discussed it knows that you just can't have a little sort of conventional reality to even know what to do with it. You have to stretch. Bigger, bigger, hold more, hold more. Why? Because that's the nature of an expanding universe, you see? An expanding universe. And when you think about this, you know, it's all too much to really comprehend, but you still have to think in these terms, because this is where consciousness is going. The idea is to come back into some experience of this essence. You know, I tell my students sometimes, you have within you a part of you that has never been born and never died. It's just aware. It has never even been frustrated. And when you look at your own life, it's almost hard to imagine that. It's never been frustrated with you. It's never been frustrated with anybody else. It is just silently observing. And I think because we are in this bardo expression between these two ages, this is the perfect time to really tap into that essence. I call it the essence self. And to really begin to commune with that part of you that was here observing the whole thing. Now, it's a part of everybody else as well, but each person will have something inside that is, in a way, it is theirs to connect with. It belongs to a greater whole, but this is your access to it. And so if you think just for a moment, just for a moment, close your eyes and think about that part of you, some part of your consciousness. Indeed, it's all of your consciousness, but let's see it as an individuated part that has never been born and has never died, that is utterly at peace with the world, indeed with the cosmos. And this part really has no name because it is eternal. It has been there fostering your movement through every lifetime you've ever experienced, not only in this dimension of Earth, not only in this star system, but everywhere you've ever been. And that part of consciousness is utterly at peace. Its job is not to change anything. You may change some things as you go through your life, but its job is to bear witness to the movement of the divine. And this part, this deeply eternal and profoundly wise part of you, is your connection to the divine, for indeed this part of you has never been separate from the divine. It has never been separate from anything. Its awareness is so vast. It understands at least this universe, perhaps even more. Do you see? Most people don't think of themselves in that way too much, do they? I mean, you have technology. Do you really need to rely on some part of you that's eternal? Well, technology may pass in order to make room for something else that collectively humanity has not yet dreamed. But you know, as we look at this process of this earth, with all the consciousness of all the beings who ever have lived here, who are living here now, and who may live here in the future, it's very vast. And if we look into some of the older systems, for instance, the Hindu system says that in the early days was the golden age, when actually gods and goddesses walked here. They never lost their connection with the divine. They were in tune with it at all times. And of course it was a peaceful plane. Their bodies were less dense. They could sort of manifest and step out of manifestation. And that age, which was a long, long age, was followed by the Silver Age, which was an age of remembering that humans in the past were perpetually connected to the divine, were able to live at peace. And that was followed by what was called a Bronze Age. And the Hindu text described this as an age of theology, postulating who the divine is, you see. And from that came the various traditions around the earth. But if you look at the Stone Age, which is what that particular tradition says we are in now, thousands of years ago it was described as an age of technology, or an age when technology was confused for the divine. Can you see the symptoms? Many people have forgotten that they are really spiritual essence here trying to figure out how to do an experience in a separated form. This is not your natural state. But you see, the more lifetimes one has, the easier it is to forget who you have been in the past and how this entire field of consciousness that we call Earth, or an even greater field of consciousness we call the cosmos, how that operates, how it nurtures you, and how you must become it. Now, that's a huge assignment. And it's not one, we can say, okay, step 1 is this, step 2 is this. It doesn't fall so neatly, but you will create it as you continue learning who you are and what planetary life is about, as well as what cosmic life is about. Today, there's a lot of talk about ascension. And that's a good thing because people need to be looking at that, But I think many people don't really know what it is they're talking about. Or they're talking in catchphrases that they've heard here and there. And you can't know what that's all about. I recently did a class where we really looked at ascension, but not as something that's sort of a kind of a fluffy thing, where this is I'm going to ascend, and some will, but this idea that it's kind of a fluffy process, it requires a lot of effort. The Buddha, who was a masterful teacher, I know. But one time, there were students gathered before him. It was a feast day, and they'd all come to have a special teaching. But it turned out he gave them a teaching, but not in the way they expected. One of the students stood up and said, "Master, in the accomplishing of enlightenment, what is the foremost principle that will get us there? Is it wisdom or is it compassion?" Now these were the two things he always talked about, you see. Wisdom and compassion, and he turned to the student, he said, "What do you say?" And he turned to the group and said, "What do you say?" And so for the next 3 days and the 2 nights in between, they argued about, was it wisdom or was it compassion? Now, those of you who know what happened afterwards, less than 100 years after the Buddha died, Buddhism was divided into 2 sects, one based in compassion and the other in wisdom. So the Theravadins, who said we must know everything the Buddha knows, have a different tradition altogether than the Mahayana, or the Great Vehicle, who said, we could live 1,000,000 lifetimes and never know all that the Buddha knew. What we can do is practice the kind of compassion he practiced. And so that brought forth the whole tradition of bodhisattvas, these beings that are dedicated to holding themselves back from their ultimate attainment until all suffering is ended. Well, the Theravadins, on the other hand, would say, why do you want to hold back? Samsara is like a burning house. Get out. Take your enlightenment and get out of here, you see. And so anyway, now that hadn't happened yet, but you could already see the leanings of where Buddhism was going to go, and he was still alive. Well, after they just argued themselves out, the student who had asked the original question finally stood up and said, "Master, we're exhausted. We cannot answer this question. Will you answer it for us? Which is more important in the attainment of enlightenment, wisdom or compassion?" And the Buddha went very soft, and he smiled, and he said, "Neither. The most important thing in attaining enlightenment is effort." And he really said a lot there, didn't he? But the real teaching was because they had exhausted themselves trying to figure out what was the right way. And so part of what I've been doing over the last few years is really anchoring in some of the salient pieces of Buddhism that I think are really needed in a new age. Because you see, the age of Aquarius, you're going to have to learn to experience mind and consciousness differently. And the Buddha always told his students, and it's very good teaching, consciousness is like the sky. It's vast, it's open, it's eternal. Nobody can put boundaries on the sky. And in the sky, lots of things happen. Even in the sky just around this one little planet. You have all manner of storms that pass through the sky. We have all manner of aircraft. Now you have these drone things, toys in a way, that pass through the sky. But you see, the sky is not disturbed. And he said that's the nature of consciousness. But the mind is something else. The mind is like the clouds that are in the sky. They come and they go. And some days they are so dense, you would never even know the sky is there by your observation. Other times, no clouds at all, just open vastness. And so, you see, I think people are right now trying to learn the difference in mind and consciousness, because they're not the same. One is much vaster than the other. And so these are the things you will be discovering as we go forward with planet Earth. I believe ultimately, right now you see a lot of resistance to the Aquarian energies that are coming in, because the old Piscean energies don't really want to die. There was a lot about the Piscean age that was wonderful. It was an age, it was the age of religion. And often it was religion that went around the world and set up schools to educate. And were it not for that, it was kind of a mission of the religion to educate people who they wanted to have as their members. And so this was a very important thing. There were other things that were important too. This learning to be loyal to a teacher. That's really Piscean energy, you see. But now as we move more into the Aquarian energy, I think you will see that communication is going to have to take a different course. Rather than you having the rules communicated to you. Do this, do that. No, it doesn't really matter which religion it is. At the more fundamentalist level, there's a lot of rules to follow. But rather than having the rules, you're going to have to learn to love each other. And the I, which was the paramount epitome, you might say, of the Piscean age, must now dissolve into the we. And when you start to think about that, it changes everything, doesn't it? It changes how you might look at the educational system. The way it is now, you have this system where students are graded. There's the top that goes on, and there are all these individual ranks that go to the bottom. And that's worked well for some things. But you're seeing it's working less well now than it used to. And I think as we move more into Aquarian energies, it is the group that must be educated. And it is, there'll be many kinds of groups, many sizes of groups. And you see, you're going to start seeing group enlightenment. And that's something that hasn't really happened so much. But a new time, we have new energies coming in. We have to learn to do everything all over again. And so it is really incumbent upon those of you who have availed yourself of the vast materials that have explained, sometimes in rather coded ways, the process of the cosmos. And that's really what was trying to happen through all the Theosophical literature and the later works of Bailey, which really draws heavily from it, you see. All of this was to establish a base of knowledge, a base of information that could help people understand they're so much bigger than their little individual selves, you see? That they draw their consciousness from the cosmos. That all the energy that runs the body, that fuels the mind, comes from the cosmos. And there's many channel teachings have talked about humans being star seeds. Well, you are made of stardust, The very same dust particles and energetic charges that congealed into a universe. And a universe that has a whole lot of space. That's what congealed to make human bodies as well. And so you have to look at what is life all about? What does it take to have life happen? Well, the most basic thing, which is related to Ray 1, is a will to remain alive. And you see that in the tiniest single-celled organisms. It's there. And beyond that, from Ray 2, we have to have some kind of consciousness, some kind of awareness. And even those little single-celled organisms have that. It's not like your awareness, just like your awareness is not like the awareness of a star or a star system, but you are aware. You can look in the mirror and recognize yourself, you see? Now hopefully you're more aware than that, but that's a place to start. But then there is a third thing. In order for life to be demonstrated, there must be form, and this is the gift of Ray 3. It must take some kind of physical form here. Now it does it differently in other parts of the universe, of course. But that's what you have here. And it's really quite amazing when these three elements come together and function well. You have life. And it's a pretty amazing process when you stop to think about it, isn't it? When you stop to think about the consciousness that's necessary even to drive the single cell organism. It's quite a mystery. You can't really, you can understand that conscious awareness comes into a form, but you can't really understand how. That's a mystery. But these are the mysteries now that we must apprehend. You know, when people think they want to solve those mysteries, you'll never solve a mystery if it's a mystery. The best you can do, and it's great, is to apprehend it. You solve problems, right? And you apprehend mysteries. And right now, in this Bardo time, the universe is trying to reveal new mysteries to you. Mysteries which humanity has never really known how to apprehend in the past. So it's a very exciting time actually to be alive. It's a very exciting time to experience will, consciousness, and form. Because they're changing all the time, aren't they? Every time you learn something new, your consciousness changes. And there is some shift in form as well. It may be subtle. But you see, it also changes that will. The will gets to be much bigger than simply a will to remain alive. You have a will to evolve, a will to comprehend not only your world, but the universe that supports it. Well, first the star system, the solar system that supports it, but then beyond and beyond. And what I can tell you, at least what I see is very exciting. There used to be a time, to go back to the medieval time that was quite amazing, a lot going on in this part of the world. The inner process was nothing like it is today. Do you know why? Well, I'll tell you in a nutshell. As you devise more and more telescopes and vehicles to explore the vastness of outer space, inner space must expand to match it. And thus inner space has much more to explore now than it did in prior times. It's not better or worse, but it is different. Now it's tricky because you have a lot more to manage. You have a lot more to grasp. And you have a lot more to reflect upon. In prior times, maybe the desert fathers and mothers of the 1st century, they were really beautiful people. They were dedicated. They were in the deserts around, in Egypt basically, but they came away from the cities so that they could just focus on becoming one with God, unifying with God. It's the same thing that people are trying to do in Ascension, but maybe a little bit different process. What did they do? The same things that traditions have always done. They had mantra, they had hymns, and they recited the Psalms, but they trained their mind exclusively on unifying with the divine. And what happened was their level of consciousness collectively expanded immensely, as did that, let's say, of the ancient Hindus. The Sanskrit language, which appeared in India basically, was a language that arose. It wasn't developed. It arose. And so there were these incredible sages who spent 18, 20 years in meditation, and maybe someone would come see them then and they'd kind of come out to counsel. But they learned the power of sound in a way that most people don't understand today at all. They learned how to use sound to actually change the course of events. And from that, there's what's so beautiful about the Sanskrit is it has, I was telling the group the other night, this huge economy in words. Very powerful mantra. But what does the Sanskrit do? They want to get to the seed syllable, the bij or bija syllable. The syllable that contains all the energy of the entire mantra, or in some cases, multiple mantras. And this takes a very penetrating consciousness to do that. But you see, the ancients in India understood the universe much more precisely than, well, the West is just now kind of coming up to it, frankly. But they got that it was consciousness out there. It's not just dust and particles and gases that light up for some reason. It's consciousness. You see, it's time to, yes, revisit it, but to look at it afresh from the perspective of human evolution today. Now, I know that many people think human evolution has gone about as far as it can go. But you see, we dare not think that way, because the cosmos hasn't gone as far as it can go. It's continuing to evolve and develop. You may not be able to see it from this little planet, but you can, well, I'm not the only one that says it, so there are a lot of people that are saying that you can have it on good authority. But this is true. And one of the ways that you can know this is those scientists who are studying the cosmos today happen to comprise the area. Well, physicists too, those studying the tiny subatomic level. These are the people today that are generating spiritual experiences of openness, unity. It's not really coming so much through the religions today. But these people who spend time contemplating the meaning of the universe, or the meaning of the activity of these tiny little particles, they see the divine. It's not that they went out looking for the divine, but they are really changing, not only in their own lives, but if you talk to them, you'll see people who, for some reason, are inordinately happy. Because they're in touch with the divine all the time, and they're beginning to figure that out. And so it is these new fields, you see, of understanding, of knowledge, and where humanity will touch the divine for this next new age. So, at least from my perspective, it's all very exciting. And partly what is incumbent upon all of us, really, who have been gifted with the opportunity to understand and to learn great truths and the overall evolution of a cosmos. We have to decide how it is we will carry these truths into a new time. In prior times, it was the time of the teacher. But now, you'll see. Probably not going to be so many teachers coming now. Because that's what the Piscean age did, you see. The teacher came and taught. In the Aquarian age, it will be group consciousness, or consciousness of groups shared, that arise into new dimensions. And that's why the we is so much more important now, or it is becoming so, than the I. Now, we can't really throw the I out altogether, but you see, the I, as the Buddha said, is an illusion. He would tell his disciples over and over, where is the self? And he would use some rather graphic things. He said, well, if I cut your body up into pieces, where would I find the self? Which piece would have the self? And so most people think, well, the self is somewhere in the brain. Maybe there's a self center or something. The Buddha said, no, you'll never find it. You can cut the brain up into thousands of pieces, you'll never find the self. It's an illusion. Now, it is a functional illusion for a while. Now it is time to do exactly as he said and transcend it. And don't worry if you don't know how. It's a co-creative process, you see. And I know you don't see, because it hasn't been done exactly yet. And yet, through the ages, there have always been those who went beyond it and said, you're only free when you step beyond it. Now, in the Tibetan tradition, which, we have all these stages of enlightenment, of course. And the one is when this pivotal point, when one confronts or sees emptiness directly. And that's a very interesting thing for the Western mind, because most people have no idea what to make of that. What do you mean, see emptiness? If it's empty, what's there to see? And what is this direct business, And yet there is a place where one has this experience of the true nature of everything that is so profound. They come face to face with the reality of everything, even the cosmos. You see, when you look out into the universe, there's far more space than there is substance. Indeed, whatever substance you find is made up of space, in different configurations of energy. And if you go down to the atomic level, if we could take a fairly simple atom, let's take one that has maybe, let's say, 6 electrons flying around it, and we blow that up so that the nucleus of that atom is the size of a cherry. Do you know how large an orbital field it would take to contain the orbit of those 6 electrons? It would be roughly the size of the Vatican. So much space, you see. And so if we look at that, the good news is, we had, in my time, we had to interpret or intuit all of this. Now, you have science that will confirm it. The wall looks very hard, but the truth is, there's far more space than there is substance. But it's functional. You see, it keeps the heat in the wintertime. It keeps the rain out. So it's very functional to prescribe it in this way. But there will come a time when it appears differently to you. And this is that direct experience of emptiness. When one grasps that, nothing is the same, ever again. And so, one is not troubled by what are called the cares of the world. One has an awareness of being rooted, indeed having sprung from this vast emptiness. Another way to say it might be spaciousness, But it's one thing to know about it, and another thing to confront it directly. And no one can do that at will. Well, in my own tradition, when one saw emptiness directly, he or she was called an Arya. What that means is stream enterer. It's just the beginning, you see. It's just the beginning. And while, until you've seen it, it seems like it's probably the greatest point of finality, but it isn't. It is then when one just enters the stream of spiritual awareness. So the picture is very big, isn't it? It's very big. And everything that you have learned up to this point is here to help you grasp the next step. But you will do it. Now, in May of next year is the Wesak, or as we said in the East, Vesak festival. And the full moon in May is the time where the Buddha is remembered. And it is said in the East that on that night every year, the full moon, he comes to his students writing on a moonbeam. And so in the East, ceremonies are done all the time to receive the Buddha. And it was predicted that 25 years after his death he would return again. Well, guess what? That's next May, 2017. And it's very interesting because many people think he will come again as a person. I don't think he will. I'm not in charge of that, but I don't think he will. It won't be that. It's the return of this consciousness. If it is received, it is so vast, it can only be received by groups. This is why your group spiritual work is so important. It's too big for any one consciousness to hold, you see. I mean, the Buddha's been growing, I say himself, he's not, certainly doesn't have male gender anymore, but that essence or that great faculty of wisdom has been growing and expanding, just like all of us do, you see. And so it's too much for any person to hold. The cells would probably fly apart. But that energy can be, indeed it should be, invoked and received. And those of you who have prepared yourself, you see, the idea of taking the trouble to study all of this information, to try to grasp it and hold it within you, that is a precious gift to give to the earth, to give to other people, because as you hold that energy, it makes it available to others, you see. Or at least in your field of energy, there's something there they can touch or generate in their own field. And so we have to look at where we are going from here. Now we can't know what any of this is going to look like 100 years from now. But in 100 years, we certainly will be well into the field of Aquarian energy that will be embracing the planet. It takes a while. The planet moves kind of slowly, you know, as it makes its orbit around the constellations. But the beauty of it is, this particular time, this Bardo time, is exceedingly potent. Those of you who would be manifestors, learn it now. Learn it now. Because the manifestation, or let's say the possibilities, are crackling with electric energy, kind of an electric quality, just waiting to be pulled into manifestation. And you can use everything you know about the rays, or about how the cosmos works. You can use it all as we move forward into this new age. So it's a tricky time. Probably the next few years will look somewhat troubling. This year has been quite troubling already. We're not even through it yet, with events of aggression, violence, killings, mass killings. It's very hard to watch, isn't it? It's very hard to watch. But what you're really seeing is the resistance to the energy that's coming. And I think it's so beautiful that the return of the Buddha is falling right as we're moving out of one age and into the other. No, technically he was about 500 years before the Piscean Age began. Usually the Piscean Age is seen to coincide with roughly the birth of Jesus. And so the Buddha was before then. So now he's coming back again at the turn of an age. 500 years isn't really very much when you're talking about astrological shifts, because again, the energy of the approaching age will get here about 800 years before the planet is really in the full scope of that energy. So it's really a very amazing transition. And as you learn to think in big packages of time, you see, you must, as you learn to think and feel and understand yourself as eternal beings, beings who were here, not individuated in physical bodies, but fully aware and fully conscious of the manifestation of a universe. You witnessed it. What an amazing experience, you see. The birth, or the congealing and the cooling of a planet. I think it's amazing. I hope you do too. The planet's not so different from your physical bodies, you know. I mean, really, if you stop and think about it, there are a couple of theories about what should have happened as the Earth congealed and cooled. And one theory says that once it started cooling, it should have just continued cooling, cooling, cooling until it went to some temperature that's very, very frigid, colder than anything that can be measured here on Earth. Temperatures in outer space, you see. That was one theory. Another said, well, no, it should start cooling, 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 and then reach a plateau for maybe 500,000 years, max, maybe fewer, and then start cooling, 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 cooling again. Well, you see, the Earth didn't do that. It is able to maintain its own temperature just like you. If you get cold, the body uncontrollably begins to shiver. Why? That creates activity in the muscles and you warm up. If you get hot, you begin to perspire. And, you know, if moisture on the surface of anything, when moisture evaporates, it cools the surface on which it's evaporating. So you have a way, you don't have to think about it. Your body just knows how to maintain its temperature. And basically the Earth has maintained reasonably the same, and that it even includes those ice ages that occur now and then. Hopefully, it doesn't look like we're headed for one anytime soon, with the planet heating up now. But roughly speaking, the planet has that same kind of awareness to maintain its temperature. But another thing is, you know, in your bodies, your bodily fluids are roughly 5% saline or salt. Your blood, your lymph. Some people eat a lot of salt. Some people eat no salt. Interestingly enough, bodies are all about 5% salt. Somehow you have an internal regulatory system that just manages this. You don't have to think about it. But you see, so does the planet. When you really calculate the amount of salt that is washed off the land into the ocean every year, goes to the rivers, they dump in the ocean. Technically, the salt content of the oceans should double every 80,000 years. But it doesn't. It remains consistent because this living body, Earth, is self-regulating. So it's really a very marvelous system, isn't it? And you see, here's the thing. Just as all of you are on a spiritual path, so is the planet. The planet's path doesn't exactly look like yours, but it undergoes initiations. And it might be interesting to think about what would the enlightenment of a planet look like. Planetary consciousness is comprised of all the human consciousness that's ever been here and is here now, but also the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, the mineral kingdom. These are all radically different forms or types of consciousness, but they all participate in the collective whole. And ultimately, you see, you're not separate from anything else, really. Maybe more the minerals, but you could make a case for your being the same as. But if you take all life forms, life force itself is the same in everything. But you see, it takes different forms. And with each form comes a function. And so the life force in that tree out there is the same as the life force in you, but the form is different. And thus the function of the tree is different than your own function. But when you put it all together, we have a vast field of consciousness that we call Earth consciousness or planetary consciousness, and that too is evolving, moving toward spiritual initiation. So you have before you a very amazing, well, I've given you a lot here. If I done too much, most of you are with me, actually, it's good.